Howdy, folks. Today we're going to go on a journey from combat photography to Adobe to the dawn of photography podcasting, all rolled into one, right after this. Welcome to Camera Shake, where we bring you the insider scoop on all things photography and videography, giving you a unique opportunity to stay ahead of the curve. We spent literally hundreds of hours interviewing some of the most renowned photographers of our time, giving you access to knowledge and expertise that's not available anywhere else. As always, I'm your host, Kirsten Nuts, and if you enjoy this content, consider lending your support on buymeacoffee.com/camerashake to help us create more exciting episodes for you. Your support really does mean the world to us. But without further ado, let's give it up for today's special guest, the combat photographer, the legend behind This Week in Photo, the man with a voice as smooth as velvet. Give it up for Mr. Frederick Van Johnson. Frederick, how are you, man?
Thank you for that intro. That was fantastic. Now I'm embarrassed to use my voice because it's smooth as velvet apparently.
It absolutely
That's
is.
awesome.
And I'm jealous.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm jealous of your voice, your accent. Mine is boring compared to yours. So
Really? Well, I mean, I'm never really sure about my accent. I think nobody's ever sure about my accent because it's such a mix of different things, you know.
Yeah, but it's cool. It's cool. It's like this boring American accent that I have. I'm trying to get rid of it.
Oh, well, you know, I worked hard on getting rid of my German accent. Actually, I didn't really. It still shines through once in a while, but you know.
Keep it.
Anyway,
Keep
man,
it.
how are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to chat. This is, you and I chat. I mean, we were chatting before we started recording, and you and I think some people you can just talk for hours and hours with, and we are those people, that we can just pick a topic and just vamp about it for forever and ever. So I'm excited. I'm excited to be on the hot seat and be interviewed by you. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a long time coming, and of course, I was on your podcast a little while ago, which was super fun. And if people want to check that out, I'll put the link in the description and in the show notes. Obviously, check it out. But most people know you as the host of This Week in Photo. But the thing that really fascinates me is I want to go back a little bit further, and I want to talk to you about your past or your origins as a combat photographer. Because I know that you used to be in the U.S. Air Force as a combat photographer. How did you get to do that, and what was that like?
Yeah, I would love to paint an exciting story of my journey into becoming, joining the combat photo team, or the combat camera team as we were. But it wasn't that exciting, right? It was basically luck of the draw, to be honest with you, with some right man for the right job kind of algorithmic decision making thrown in there. So becoming a photographer in the Air Force, especially when you're enlisted like I was, enlisted versus officer, right? Officers, of course, have more control and insight into their path in the military. Enlisted people are a little bit less in control of what's going to happen to you. And in basic training, with my first step in the military, basic training was fun, but you get to this point in basic where they're assigning jobs and who's going to do what. And they assign those jobs based on this universal sort of aptitude test that all enlistees take before they join the military. And it kind of determines where you're strong at, where you're weak at, what kind of jobs you should do, that kind of thing. And apparently I scored high on the creative side. So they were going to make me a journalist in the armed forces sort of news organization, like a combat journalist. And I'm going out there writing stories about everything. I thought that was amazing. And then they switched it to photojournalist and gave me orders. My first base was going to be in Minot, North Dakota, at the base up there. Basically that's the frozen tundra with missile silos buried underground, right? And that's the mission, is to maintain and keep all that stuff running properly. That did not sound fun. So I wasn't that happy about it. I was like, yeah, 2 years. Okay. I'm going to boldly go where no Johnson has gone before and go check out Minot, North Dakota. Then at the last minute, I got orders to Tokyo instead. I got diverted, and they're like, "Oh, Johnson, you're you're not going to Minot anymore. You're going to Yokota Air Base in Japan. And I'm like, okay, that sounds great. It was a different kind of apprehension at that point because I'm like, I don't speak Japanese. I don't write Japanese. Definitely don't look Japanese. So how am I going to get along in Japan for 2 years? Turns out, best experience of my life. The combat photojournalism part of it came where, just real quick, when you join, at least then, this was a while ago, right? So I'm sure things have evolved and changed since then. But when you joined back then, you go in as a base level photographer. And a military base, for those who don't know, at least a US military base, is a self-contained, basically a town, in some cases a large town with a mission. And it's populated by military people. There's barracks there. There's single family homes there for married personnel. There's buildings for offices. There's a runway for jets, all the things, stores, the little mall, McDonald's, gas stations, all of that, gym, everything. We had sports teams that were competing against each other, all that. So it's a really cool, self-contained little town. Our mission as the combat camera group was in times of let's call it, non-war, when there's no war going on or there's no overall military mission happening. The day-to-day mission was to support the base photographically, kind of like any newspaper that's in operation today, or there's not many of those, but any news gathering operation. Let's say something happened, a car crashed on base, and the law enforcement team would need documentation or photographic documentation of the accident. They'd call us, we go out, take a photo or take several photos and provide it to them as the customer. Other cases, a general may need a portrait. So he'd come into our facilities. We had a studio set up. We do the portrait, process, print, give the general the photo. Forensic photography. I remember my first week at Yokota, the hazing week. My first job was they sent me to the base hospital because some guy had died playing basketball, had a heart attack or something, and they do a mandatory autopsy for some reason. And they were doing the autopsy, and I was the forensic photographer at that point, taking photos of every little bit that they cut out of this guy. So that was my hazing. Will Frederick throw up on this thing? So when you're base level photographer, your duties, which is a good thing, your duties could range anywhere from sports photography to portrait to forensic to investigative to whatever's needed, group photography, all of that. And then during that, you're learning how to be a photographer. You're training, you're understanding light. There was no digital back when I was in the military, so we're processing and printing our own film. So all of that, from soup to nuts, we were even rolling our own film into the canisters. So, and then you graduate from that to the next level when your superiors deem you worthy. And that next level is combat photojournalism, where you then deploy out to different places in conflict zones or whatever. And those are the guys that would sit back, with their feet up on the desk while us little airmen ran around and did forensic photography and all that stuff. Those were the cool kids that got to sit back and crack jokes all day until something important happened that needed their photojournalistic skills. So, and that's kind of the flow, and that's the path of ascension. Once you reach photojournalism or the photojournalist level, that's kind of where you hang out. You're a photojournalist for life after that, for the most part. Even when you get out, you still consider yourself one of those guys. So yeah, it was fun. That's an experience that we complained about while we were in, because we were just kids. They're like, oh, I got to go shoot this thing. Oh, I remember I had to go in the middle of the night. We used to wear pagers back then. In the middle of the night, my pager went off, and I was like, 3 a.m. What could they possibly need photos of at 3 a.m.? And there was a domestic disturbance in base housing where all the married folks live. And it turns out, so I had to get photos of the abuse on one of the spouses. And then also the house, the reason for the fight was they were hoarders, which is illegal in the military. They were literally hoarders, and the house was just, I don't even want to describe it, but it was not livable. Let's just say that. And I had to document that, exiting the house every 5 minutes to get some air, then go back in and take photos. So, but I lived to tell the tale. So, it's a good experience all around, kind of getting my feet wet and marinating, as it were, in the world of photography and in the world of light and even in the world of customer service, because we were basically a service organization that was shooting for our customers, which were personnel on the base, and delivering a final product to them. And if it wasn't right, we'd redo it or do it again, all that stuff. So it was a good time.
It sounds like a really great all-round training because you'd be dealing with, portraiture, studio lighting, and then natural light, and then reportage, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it's a really great all-round on-the-job training, actually.
Yeah, no, yeah, it actually was. I think it's better than, and you mentioned OJT, or on the job training. There's two back then, and probably the same now, but there's two ways you could become a photographer in the military. Of course, they have to say you're a photographer in basic training, and then you go on that path. But then that path could lead to formal training, where there's a military photo school in Denver, Colorado, or actually Colorado Springs. So you could go there and train to be a photographer for a number of months or whatever, and then from there you'd be deployed to your final base. Or you could get sent directly to your final base, and they give you a stack of what they called CDCs. These were career development courses, right? It was a stack this thick of basically all photography, starting with what is a photon all the way through to advanced photographic techniques and all that stuff. And it was basically a space thing. Like if there was space for another student at the school, they would send you there. If there wasn't, they'd send you directly to your base. They sent me directly to Japan from basic training and gave me the stack of CDCs. And I remember that first one I opened up. I think the first one, I think I still have those CDCs too. Um, when I opened up that first volume, I remember just sort of falling in love with light, because it started with explaining what light is and how we still don't understand some aspects of how light behaves, and the properties of light, and diffuse versus specular lighting, and how shadows are formed, and all of the speed of light, all this stuff. And I'm like, this is science fiction stuff right up my alley, right? And I loved it. I was kind of in love from that point forward. I blew through those CDCs. I think they give you like a year to go through the whole thing. Then you get regular evaluations. I think I went through that whole thing in like 3 or 4 months and just sort of knocked it out, because I was leaning into it. I'm like, oh, okay, this next chapter is about whatever this photographic technique is, and I just go out and do it, because we had unlimited access to any kind of emulsion film or size film that you wanted. We had an equipment locker that was just full of multiples of every Nikon lens that you could possibly want, including all the bodies and all that. So it was the ideal way to learn photography back then, because it was free. You just go, you're shooting in your day job, but then you keep your kit with you all the time. It's yours, issued to you, so you keep it until you leave the base. And on the weekends, we would go out in Tokyo and take pictures and roam around and do portraits of our girlfriends or whatever, and then go back into the office and process them in our off-duty time, and give people prints and all that, and then go to work on Monday morning. So, yeah, it was a really good time. And I think that was more than anything in terms of my photographic career, the most impactful thing that I've been privileged to do was to join the military and be a photographer in the military. So, thank you, Air Force.
Did you ever were you ever deployed in like combat situations?
No, I wasn't. I was in during I'm going to date myself here, so brace yourself. So I was active duty during Desert Storm, Desert Shield, that whole debacle. And when I joined, I was in that CDC window. So they don't deploy you if you're still a student, right? Learning how to do things. So I'm doing my CDCs and shooting and doing my assignments and doing the base level work and processing film that came back from people that were deployed out there. But everything was done by the time I was ready to go, and then I separated by the time there was another conflict, luckily. But yeah, no, I never deployed into the field, which I'm happy to say. The and I think, one of the bases I was stationed at was Vandenberg Air Force Base here in California, which is now Vandenberg Space Force Base. I was
Yeah.
stationed there, and part of that mission was to, and that group is the combat camera group is still there, operating under Space Command. Part of the mission was to document ICBM test launches and Titans and Minuteman and Atlas launches, and we would document them from the air. From UH-1 helicopters with doors open, and we're hanging out with our feet dangling out of the helicopters, shooting film in the middle of the night. So those kind of things I was privileged to do. Um, the guys in my group we always had this, but I want to deploy kind of feeling in our head. You're like, this is great. I love doing all this stuff, but I want to go out there. I want to be, I want to be on the ground, and where all the danger is. Retrospect, I was probably lucky not to be sent out there, but still, part of me wants to have gone out there to do some real combat photojournalism in actual combat. But even then, the photographers that deployed weren't on the front lines. It wasn't like the movie Full Metal Jacket, for the most part, where you're embedded with the frontline Marines that are going in and taking a village or something. It's more like you're documenting the setup of the installation and the base and the makeshift temporary runway, and any kind of event that happens that the Pentagon here needs to know about. That's what we were capturing. And occasionally we go out into the field, but generally speaking, the folks that were out there could take photos for themselves if they wanted to anyway. So yeah, so it's a complex kind of organization, and the mission was basically the same as the mission for a lot of folks today here on the ground. It's take great photos and deliver them to people that need them. And that's what we do. Although it's much easier now.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I'm guessing
Yeah.
everything is digital now anyway, even in the military.
Yeah.
That's
Oh
great.
yeah. 100%. 100%. Yeah.
So did your experience in, being a combat photographer in the military, how did that influence your photography or your photography's career after you left the military?
A lot. I think I would credit to who I am today. I think as a person, as a photographer, as a content creator, as a dad, as a friend, as an uncle, all the things. I think the two, aside from my parents, and my being raised by great parents, the the two things that I credit to being most impactful to sort of my worldview and the way that I approach situations today, whether business or personal, have been the military and all the things that I've learned in there, including being exposed to a wide variety of people from different places in the world, different cultures, different religions, different ideologies, but all in one place with a common mission. So that having that is priceless in a lot of ways, to have that experience from a Midwestern Illinois kid being kind of exposed to the world. You can't get that kind of education in a book or in school or on YouTube. And then the other one was the time that I spent at Apple as a product manager on the Aperture and iPhoto team out there, and understanding how that big organization worked and how products are created, and the meticulous attention to detail that everybody, for the most part, in Apple applies to their work to make sure everything is perfect before it goes out. Because a company like Apple, is under intense scrutiny for every single thing that they release. Even if it's just a web page, everything is under just an intense amount of scrutiny. If you use a comma instead of a period, there's an article written about it, right? So that impressed on me just the importance of attention to detail and dialing things in, for better or for worse in some areas. But all that kind of worked together, because on the Apple side, it was we got a lot of fanboys out there and people that love the brand and love the products and rely on the products. But on the military side, this is the mission, and we are shooting classified photography in a lot of cases that's going eyes only to people way up the chain than I am. So there's that pressure as well to produce something that's, as perfect as you can get it. So not that I'm perfect at all, but there's this goal to try to be, as I'm sure everybody has it, but the goal to do a job as well as you can possibly do it and make it as crisp as possible, which, to be honest, in a lot of ways, that's a detriment too, because in this fast moving era, this progress, there's the whole adage of progress, not perfection. You get caught up in that perfection eddy and you lose time, when you could have shipped the thing that you were working on a week ago, you're still trying to make it perfect. So that's a personal demon I continue to deal with, let's say.
Yeah, that's a difficult balance, actually. This what do they call it? Paralysis by analysis.
Analysis paralysis. Yes. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I get
it's
that.
Like, it's a really difficult thing. And of course, whenever you're doing anything creative, like for instance, launching a podcast is a really good example. We've had conversations about that, off air.
Yeah.
It's this thing where you can quite easily talk yourself out of a really good idea by just focusing on all the obstacles and hurdles, when really all you need to do is really just to get it done, and sometimes, and I remember, when at the very beginning, when Nick and I were first talking about, putting a podcast together, I remember at some point, I just had this thought that actually done is better than perfect. We just have to get it done. And we just took into account that the first episode was going to be horrendous, which it was, by modern standards. But at the same time, it set us on a path of improvement and getting better and learning, and so it really can be, on one hand it can be a hindrance. On the other hand, there's also a danger that you fall, there's a danger to becoming content with the way things are and not necessarily pushing yourself as much.
Yes.
And that's also something that can happen, obviously, as you probably know, because the one thing amongst many things, including a screensaver in the back there, but one thing that we share, of course, is that we both run podcasts, and so we have a lot in common in that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's the whole analysis paralysis thing is real, and what I've experienced over the years, or the way that I manage that is, I'm the guy that when I have an idea, I'm gonna sketch it out first on paper and kind of think about it, and I'm gonna research it on the web, on YouTube, social media, whatever, and then I'll start, designing what this thing is going to be. Let's say it's a website or some sort of course or something that I'm going to create. I'll have a flow chart built. I'll have I use an application called, what is the application that I use? ClickUp. Sorry, there's so many. I use an app called ClickUp, which manages all my different tasks. It manages my life, to be honest with you. But when I'm ready to do a project, I'll spin up a new area within ClickUp, and all the different aspects in lists go in there. But what I've learned over the ages what I've learned over time is, instead of it being a start to finish proposition where, you can't, it's not done until it's completely done, like, and ready for, say, Steve Jobs to look at. It's more of shades of gray from start to finish, with little milestones in the middle. My friend Rick Salmon used to tell me, he used to use the adage, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And that still hangs true in my head. So I've had this big task. I just chop it up into little milestone pieces. And each one of those pieces, you apply that, perfection. I want it to be perfect too, but it's a shorter, manageable amount of the project. Like, for example, if I'm going to spin up a new podcast, I would break that into pieces and say, okay, well, first, okay, I need to name it. I need to see if there's an audience for that. I need to check out what the competitive landscape looks like for that particular show, and can I add value? on and on and on, right? And each one of those bits of research or even implementation, like, oh, I need to build a logo for it, I need to figure out where I'm going to host it, all these things, build those up into together, those add up to the elephant. And the way my mind works, say there's like, I don't know, 50 different things that need to get done for a particular project. I work best when I divide them up into like little bits of three. So like today, for example, I have a yellow sticky on my desk with three things that I need to get done to push towards a particular goal. And if I don't get those three things done, I'm a failure in my head. And like before I can leave and say I'm done for the day, right? Leave my home office or go out for a drive or whatever, I need to tick off these three things. And they may not be big. It may be, email this person to see if you can't set up a meeting, write this blog post, and investigate this new text to video AI thing and figure out if it makes sense to talk about on the show. Those three things. If I knock those out, I feel like I'm a success for the day, and then I move on to the next three. So yeah, it's manageable. Doing a lot of stuff. Like you and I both, we manage a lot of stuff and spin a lot of plates, so it's very manageable if you divide it into manageable bite-sized pieces. You're looking at it as a whole, like, holy crap, I got to manage this. I'm essentially managing a whole division of SmugMug right now by myself, and I'm booking guests and editing and hosting and speaking with advertisers and on and on and on and on. It's a long list. It could look daunting, but if you break it down into smaller pieces that are easily consumed, then it becomes fun again. And that's what I do generally on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I like that way of thinking, because I've found that by breaking things down into manageable tasks, I've actually learned a lot about myself. Like, I've learned that I'm really good at making lists. I'm not very good at completing lists on a day-by-day basis, because I've sort of learned that, I have a tendency personally, to cram too many things into one day. My family call it K-time. They, my wife and my kids continuously tell me that I have no sense of time whatsoever, which, for a former session musician, that's bad news. But, yeah, so it's, this thing where I would think in my head, I'd be like, oh yeah, I can get that done. Like, I have an hour and a half. Yeah, I can get this, and this done. And then, of course, I only get one out of those three tasks done because I've completely underestimated the amount of time that it would take me. And that's the one thing I've learned about myself. And so the way I manage things now is completely differently. I basically, I set out tasks and I sort of prioritize them based on, how important they are. And I know that I can get 3 tasks done. That's sort of my average, my daily average. So I basically pick the 3 most important tasks on that day and I try and get them done. And then
exactly.
And then I move on to the next thing that may be sort of medium importance. It's essentially all the stuff that needs to get done today, stuff that doesn't really matter whether it happens today or tomorrow, and then the bottom of the list is the kind of stuff that's actually not important at all, the kind of stuff that even if I didn't do them, it wouldn't be the end of the world. The kind of stuff that that's
absolutely.
Nice to do.
Absolutely, yeah. And one of the other tricks I'll throw in there, at least this is a mind hack for me, and maybe it'll work for other folks, is humans have this innate need to complete things, right? And when you start something, you feel like you need to complete it. There's a bunch of other kind of mental triggers, but one of them is just that need to finish something once you've started it. And I play on that. Like, for example, to trick my own self. Like, for example, I need to reorganize the garage, or, clean off this shelf in the garage because it's messy, and I want to put my car cleaning stuff on there. So I need to clean it out or whatever. Instead of saying, and it's a daunting task, right? So the garage is big and there's all this stuff on the side and I got to move this and all that. And I'm like, okay, maybe I'll do it on the weekend. And then the weekend comes, you don't do it, whatever. You procrastinate. The trick is tricking yourself into doing just a little bit of it. Like, instead of saying, okay, I got to go out and clean the entire garage, maybe I'll do it Saturday, and then not doing it. You say, you know what? There's one shelf in there that I'm just going to go in and do that one shelf because that is where I've stored this, this, and this. And if I just get that shelf done, I'll feel good about myself. Again, sort of breaking it down. You know, I won't feel like a failure if I get that one shelf done, right? But then when you go in and you do that one shelf and you're in that mode, typically what happens to me is like, oh yeah, that wasn't so bad. Maybe I'll do this show. And then maybe I'll do this one. Oh, maybe I'll do that, you know, and then you end up, the whole garage is done, you know, and you're looking for the next thing. So if you can, like they say, the first step is always the hardest. I think that's very true because if you trick yourself into doing a bit of a larger project, it makes the whole project seem less daunting because you're now engaged in it and you kind of get a better indication of what you need to do and what needs to get done. Plus, you feel like you've made a little progress already, so why not continue that momentum? So yeah, it's a subtle thing, but I challenge your audience to try it. If there's something that you've been putting off, look at it as a bunch of small bits together or pieces of a larger task and go do one bit of it. Like just go do one bit of it and see if you can resist doing more after you do that one bit. And it's very hard to resist doing more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, breaking things down into smaller chunks is invaluable. There's another technique I use
Yeah.
sometimes, which is, I think it's called time bracketing or something, where you basically set yourself a time limit
Mm-hmm.
for a particular task. And so you can literally, take your day and chop it up into like chunks, an hour and a half of this, an hour of this, half an hour of that. And once you hit your time limit, you basically stop for the day. It's a hard stop and that's it. And where that works for me really well is with emails, because I loathe emails. It's the one thing that I could quite easily live my life without emails at all. But it has to get done. You got to respond to emails and blah, blah, blah. And so what I say to myself, I have this, I can't remember what the app was called. I had like a timer and it basically set to 25 minutes. And I know that my attention span when it comes to emails is 25 minutes. That's it, and then my mind starts to wander off and I need to do other things and blah, blah. So I basically say to myself, okay, I make that the first thing that I do because it's the thing that I loathe the most. So I'll make it the first thing that I do in the morning. And I sit down and I set my time to 25 minutes and I start rattling through emails. And when the timer bleeps, that's it. I'm done with emails. I'm not going to look at the emails anymore until maybe later on in the day, where I've set up another 25 minutes or not at all. If my work is done, then that's it. But I'm not going to move on to 35 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour of emails, because before you know it, you get sucked into this thing where then before you turn around, it's a bit like TikTok, You start looking at TikTok, you just go, before I do this, I'm just going to have a quick look at, that's TikTok, And then before you know it, the whole afternoon's gone and you're like, oh.
Yeah, and you just,
they suck at me again.
Break away. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, same way. Yeah, no, that specifically, and especially for social media, having that time bracket mentality is golden, right? Because like you said, you get sucked into that vortex and time is gone. The hard thing for me for non-social media is like I really enjoy the stuff that I do, obviously, and I've been doing it for a while. So when you enjoy what you're doing, you want to keep doing more of it, right? So I love learning about like AI and playing around with different prompts and doing all that stuff. But that in and of itself could suck up the whole day, or multiple days if you let it. So yeah, you have to have that willpower to pull away from tasks, even the tasks that you enjoy doing. So not all tasks are negative. Some tasks you gotta disconnect from them because they can also suck up time away from the main goal. So
that's
so
it.
this is like turned into a productivity show. I love this.
I know,
this is right up my alley.
But that's I think that's really valuable, for any first of all, for any creative person, but also you generally, any photographer, because we have to deal with so many different things. And just to bring this back into a photography conversation, or into the world of photography. Like one of the things, for instance, that so one of the things I do is obviously I shoot headshots. So what happens is you've got the actual physical shoot, and then you've got the editing part or the post-production stage after that. And I really like working in Photoshop. I really like retouching. It's a thing I love doing. I love doing composites and all that kind of stuff. And I can spend hours and hours and hours getting into something. The problem for me is that once I've done the session, once I've shot the session and the client leaves, in my head, that session is done. And of course it isn't, because there's all the post-production that still needs to happen. And so I like, my attention span is basically like, do you remember that dog in Up where it's just like, squirrel?
Yeah.
And that's, the minute I open Lightroom or Photoshop and there's another thing that pops up and I've got like, oh yeah, that's the shot that I shot like, at 2 a.m. in the morning in London with the skyline. Ooh, I need to retouch that. And I'm just going to do a little bit on that. And then before you know it, it's like an hour and a half later and I still haven't done a bloody headshot, and I'm still retouching, a skyline. And that's the thing that I find hard is to break myself away from the stuff that I love doing, that I really like to do. And to, sometimes and to focus on the things that I actually have to do, because those are the things that make money. And I know that about myself, and my wife knows that about me. And so it'll be very often there's like a little comment that comes from the kitchen, so it goes like, how is that helpful to your business? Like, it probably isn't. Let's get on with that. It's like the voice of reason.
That is a really good point, because one of the as solopreneurs, one of the calculations that I think we have to make all the time, because opportunities come up all the time and different things that you want to do and work on come up all the time, and ideas, shiny objects, and software, and a YouTube video that's explaining this tutorial, is explaining this technique that you want to try, or the new show that just popped up, that just been released on Netflix or something that shows up, you want to watch. All these different things are coming at you. And one of I think the calculation that us solopreneurs have to make is spending time on this thing, or spending revenue on this thing, or giving this thing my attention, is it furthering my ultimate goal? Right. And that goal may not be monetary. It may not be, hey, my goal is to get my business to a $50,000 a month level. That it may not be that. Your goal may be for the year. It may be, I want to do, like, personally, I want to up my public speaking game and do more public speaking and keynote type things. I want to learn and edge my way into that space. So I have to ask myself, if someone is inviting me to speak at this particular conference, does that further my goal? And should I say no? Or should I say yes? So the art of saying no is, I think, hard for a lot of us, right? It's an opportunity comes in, you have the time to do it. It seems kind of interesting, but it may not be in service to your overall goal. The knee-jerk reaction, especially if it's someone you know, like, and trust, is to just say, yes, I will do that. Of course, it's very hard to say no. No, I'm not going to do that. Even if you have time to do it, and you still say no, because it's not in service of your overall goal. And it's not a hard and fast rule, of course, because we're humans. But you're just kind of keeping in your head that, does this help me get to where I want to be? Or is my time better spent doing something else, whether it be something that's for me educationally, or furthering the business, or even the things that I don't enjoy doing that much? Should I take that time and apply it over there? So I think that's something I'm still learning. I don't know if I'll ever master it, but yeah, it's still, I envy the people that no comes easy to. I'm not one of the people that no comes easy to.
Yeah, that's really valuable advice. And I think especially at the beginning of, someone's career, where, you tend to want to please people and always say yes. And you sort of think like, well, whenever somebody asks me to, I don't know, shoot their birthday party, that's an opportunity. Or maybe it's an opportunity, to promote my services, or to get my name out there, or to make some money. But what I found, and this is, again, you're right, it's a really hard lesson to learn. It's it's the ability to say no. Where I learned that actually was in music, because just like in photography, and I think this is true for all creative arts, by the way, but in music, what happens is, when people know that you're a musician and that you play an instrument, you get asked to play all the time. Like, to the point where somebody might go like, oh, hey, do you want to come to my party? Oh yeah, cool. Thanks, man. Yeah, make sure you bring your guitar. Why?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, so then, you go like, well, if you want me to come to your party to perform, then have a price for that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
like, that's how I make my living. Not that I make my living, but you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like, you kind of go, well,
But you're a
and
professional. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so, it's like, okay, well, it's different if somebody asks me to come to their party and I decide that I want to take my guitar, or I'm at the party, there's a guitar in the corner, and everybody's had a few drinks, and like we go, okay, well, there's a guitar, let's go. That's different.
Mm-hmm.
But it's this, this sort of expectation. Just because you're a musician, you must therefore love to play and love to perform
Yeah.
to people. And so, and the same thing, of course, happens in photography, where it's like, oh yeah, make sure you bring
Absolutely.
a camera. Well, okay,
Yeah.
that's,
I get that all the time. I used to get that all the time. I used to get um, yeah, it used to just be a foregone conclusion. If you invited me, then I'm going to take pictures because I'm always
yeah,
taking
exactly.
pictures. So if you invited me to something, I'm going to take pictures and I'll probably send you a gallery link later. And then people start abusing it, of course, friends and family, right? They're like, hey, can you do my wedding? You know, uh, with no expectation of paying you for anything. It's just like, oh,
Yeah,
can you just do it because you love doing it? Don't you love photography? This I'm doing you a favor by allowing
yeah,
you to shoot my wedding for free because you're gonna, do the thing
yeah.
that you enjoy doing. And I had to have a conversation with one friend about that, where they were walking down that route, and I was like, would you ask a chef? Would you invite a chef to dinner and expect them to cook? Like
Yeah, exactly.
how does that work? What is that mentality? I mean, what I started doing years ago when that comes in, first of all, the art of saying no, right? That's another one where no, I don't do that kind of stuff anymore. Happy to bring my camera and do a couple snapshots, but I'm not gonna, don't count on seeing any of them. I may share them with you, so you set expectations like that. Um, but then if I do go, I make sure to position it as an expensive gift that I'm giving you, right?
Mhm.
Because you don't want the word to get out that you'll just do things for free, and your work is devalued because you're just this photographer that will take pictures of anything if asked, right? So
Yeah,
instead, yeah, I'm gonna shoot your wedding, or your event or whatever, and here's my normal price. I'll even send them an invoice, with my price on it, with the price discounted by 100%, and make the total due is zero. But the whole idea is to let them see this is what you would have paid had I not gifted this service to you, thereby adding weight to it and diffusing future asks. Because now if they ask you again, they're like, oh, Frederick charges this much money. Do I really want to ask him to do it for free? That's a lot of money, to ask somebody to just do for. So if you don't do that, then they devalue your work. Then they just think, it's worth
yeah, and
nothing. When you put a
yeah,
number on it, now it has gravity, right?
exactly, and you're forever going to be the cheap photographer. That's the other
Yeah.
thing. The one of the things I've also learned the hard way is, when somebody calls you and asks you to do a particular thing, like in my case, I would get calls, about headshots, and it's interesting to me, really, because my prices are it, very boldly displayed on my website. There's really no
Yeah.
question over how much I charge. It's very obvious. There's nothing's hidden. It's all front and center, and and that's basically it. And so I often get calls where people sort of expect a super cheap bottom bottom end type of like low cost headshot, and it's like, well,
Mhm.
that's not what I do. If that's what you want, I know a guy, and I'm happy
Yeah.
to give you his number. If that's what you're
Yeah.
looking for,
Yeah.
100%. It's the sort of what's the comparison? Like the so in the UK, it's we have different supermarkets. Like the cheap supermarkets, like the Aldis and the Lidls, and then the sort of
Mhm.
mid-range ones. They're called Tesco's over here. I don't know what the equivalent is in the US. Is it Walmart maybe or
Probably
something?
Whole Foods. Whole
Well,
Foods
yeah,
here. Yeah.
and then you've got the expensive supermarkets, like here they're called like Marks and Spencers, or what's it called? Waitrose, the
Mhm.
Waitrose
Yeah.
of the luxury liner where everything's more expensive. You know,
Yeah.
but you can feel good about yourself because apparently it's healthier just because you pay more for it. But
Electrically assisted shopping carts. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, yeah. So but the problem is if you want, if you want to position yourself or you want to position your business in a particular range, and I'm not, I think if I compare my prices to my local competition, I'm probably more expensive than most of the people around me. But it also means I don't work as much. In other words, I don't have to cram in loads of clients every day or every week. It's easier for me to service fewer clients, but actually have clients that maybe value the work a little bit more, and that's what makes
That's
me
right.
happier. That's the
Yeah.
sort of thing. So I think, and that's important, when you get a phone call and you have somebody on the phone and they want to actually, they want to pay cash money, for a photo, it's hard to say no
Yeah.
just because it doesn't fit in with the way you position your business. But it's important to say no. It's really important, because
Yeah.
otherwise, it's virtually impossible for you to stay, on that level of business. Just like a supermarket. I mean, if Waitrose in the UK, if they started selling food at the same prices as Tesco's or as Lidl, they would never keep their clientele. The audience would shift for them. The customer base
Yeah.
would shift, and so it's important to do that. So that's the art of saying no can be very difficult, especially if somebody wangles, even if it's just a little bit of cash at the end of that, and to say like, well, actually,
Yeah.
no, it doesn't fit in with my plan at all.
Yeah, and on it's still, there, even with that, there's a lot of nuance in there too, because
Sure.
saying no, yeah, we could say, yeah, say no to the lower price ones, but if you're in a financial bind and you're trying to pay your rent or feed your baby or whatever, saying no on value, on principle,
Yeah.
because that's beneath you, it becomes a different kind of
Oh,
equation on
100%.
what you can say no to. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And the thing is, of course, if you're, for instance, if you're in a financial bind, or if what you're doing isn't really working, that may be down to a number of different factors, location being one of them, for example.
Hmm.
I think, if you live in a big city like London or New York City or something like that, you can really niche down. You can basically say, well, these are the customers I want to service. And, and there's plenty of businesses around, of that type. And it's great. But if you live in a small town or somewhere in the suburbs or like in a small village or something like that, you may have to do a greater variety of things, obviously. And then you have to be honest with yourself and basically say, well, my business model just isn't working here, and I need to shift. I need to change something, and that may mean servicing a different type of clientele, creating
Yeah.
products that are more attractive to, you know, to a different range of customers. Absolutely, 100%. But
Yeah.
that's just part of running a business. I mean, it's a
Sure.
little bit like
Yeah. Yeah.
podcasting.
It's situational. Yeah. 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 Just like, yeah, same podcasting. It's situational, right? And it depends. We're painting broad 30,000-foot strokes of decision making and saying no, but the truth lies in the details, and it's much more nuanced. Like you said,
Yeah.
geography based, where you are in business, how talented are you? Are you at a position in your career where saying no is even feasible? Are you at the level where you need to start brand positioning? Maybe you're not at that level yet, and you just want to,
Yeah.
get some exercise in your trigger finger there. So there's a lot of variables that you have to take into account before you can start saying, no, I'm going to take this and not that, or I want to
Yeah.
I want to position my brand more as a, Tiffany's, or high end Lexus, Tesla, or whatever, versus something lower end. So when you're ready to do that, then you start getting into that calculus of saying no. But still, even then, like the family photographer that's being asked to shoot for free all the time, that may make sense when you're learning, because sure, yeah, I want to shoot your wedding because I need shots for my portfolio, because when I start charging, I need to show that I know how to shoot weddings. So that's a gift, you letting me shoot your wedding, because I'm getting something out of it. My payment is experience shooting the wedding, and the photos, assuming they come out great, the photos I can put on my website to hopefully get paying clients later. But if you're already established, and this is what you do, like in your case with the headshots, you're already established with this, and somebody asks you to decrease your rate or shoot for free, then it's a whole different conversation at that point,
Yeah.
because you're an established professional, right?
Yeah. So exactly. And there's two things. So one, I always think like, very often actually, there's a case where I don't charge my full fee, but I make the decision, so I'm in the driving seat, and I'll say, for not too long ago, I had a friend of mine who needed headshots because his business wasn't really working out that well, and he just needed to basically, create different images for himself, and and put himself out there on social media and so on and so forth. And I thought, I can help him by creating new images. He's in a real estate business basically. And I thought, well, I can help, and I'll do that. Absolutely no problem. And I know he can't afford my full fee, absolutely no problem. But that's why I'm in the driving seat, and I can say, okay, I'm willing to do that. There's a lot of the time, I think when you're building a business, what happens is that you reach a certain point and then you plateau for a while, and then you're going to have to start thinking, well, how am I going to move this business on? Like, where am I going next? Because I could do this in this way, in exactly the same way for the next 30 years. Is that what I want to do? Or do I want to, move this business on? Do I want to, build it, and so on? And I remember in the olden days, this before I was in photography, and I was, obviously I was a musician. And for quite a long time, I used to teach guitar lessons. And so I remember moving out of London. I moved into a tiny little town about 40 miles outside of London, out in the countryside. Beautiful. But of course, I didn't know anybody, and I didn't have any students. And I needed to figure out how I was going to set up a little teaching practice, right? And so what I did is I got myself an agent, and I actually managed to fill up my timetable relatively quickly. Like over the course of maybe 4 months or something, or 6 months, let's say, my timetable was full. Monday to Friday and Saturdays even, I basically filled up pretty much every hour I could fill up with students. And I remember thinking at the time, it's like I don't know how old I was, like maybe 26, 27 or something. And I thought like, well, I'm not even 30 yet. And I've already kind of maxed out my potential yet. I can't be it. I need to think of something. And so, I did two things. I thought, well, okay, I can do two things. I can't take any more students on, so I can increase my prices. And I doubled my prices overnight. And I lost half of my students. And I remember my partner at the time went, oh man, that's crazy. You've just lost so many people who can't afford it. And I said like, well, that's true. But what I've actually done is I've capped 50% of my students, but now I have half of the week of free time where I can either book in more students or I can do something else with that time. But I haven't actually lost any money, but what I've gained is time. And of course, I mean, it turned out that the students that stayed with me were different students. They were, professionals that could afford, paying more for a lesson and so on. But what it also allowed me to do was to actually start thinking, okay, what am I going to do with the rest of my time? And then what I did was I figured, well, if I ever get into a situation again where I can't take on any more students myself, then the logical thing to do then is to hire somebody else to teach for me. And so I thought, okay, well, if I hire another guitar teacher to take on some students that I can't take, and I manage the whole thing, and I take like a management fee or a cut or whatever, then if I can do that, then I can also hire a drum teacher and a singing teacher and a keyboard teacher, because really it's the same thing. And then you very quickly arrive at the idea of a school, because really when you teach different types of instruments, then you're really you call it a school. And so then basically I ran a music school for 12 years.
That's great. That is great, right? Exactly.
That was exactly the thinking, originally. And the only thing I had to figure out is, really, once I decided I was going to set up a music school, the only thing I had to figure out was what kind of school do I want to run, And I thought, okay, well, I went to a college called MI, Musicians Institute, which is a contemporary music school. And I thought, well, I remember when I was a student there, I thought, and I was like 19 or 20, I thought, would have been cool if this thing had existed for when I was like 12, 13, or 14, that would be cool if you could run something that's this serious and professional and all that kind of stuff. There's no reason why you can't adapt that to work for 12, 13, 14, 15-year olds, right? So
Yeah,
when I
absolutely.
came to the point where I decided that I was going to set up a music school, I'd already formed the idea as to what I thought this music school would look like. And so it was relatively easy to then to take that principle and then apply that to a younger audience. And then, and as a consequence, actually, that school blew up. I think within the first year, we had 350 students on board, for that.
Wow.
And I went from literally like just doing it myself to having 16 employees within 12 months.
That's great.
That was a steep learning curve, because it was like, shit, now I need to know about employment and like how all of this stuff, tax, like what? What is that?
This is adult stuff.
I know. It's like now all of a sudden I'm growing up. What's happened? But I did that for 12 years. And then until I really had enough of that and had to change things over. But but it's this thing where sometimes, when you start out, when you run a business or you start a business, you get to a point, especially when you realize that things are leveling off, you sometimes have to make drastic changes. And then being able to say, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. That's really important. And it's bloody hard to do.
It is really hard. Yeah, it is really hard. Yeah, because, there's the conflicting, kitschy sayings. Like, one is, if at first you don't succeed, try again, right? Which makes sense, right? But then the other one is the definition of insanity. Whoever came up with that is repeating the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So it's like, they don't work together. Exactly. Is it try again? Or am I insane? Is there a limit to trying again? And anything beyond that limit is insanity? Like, how do I, I don't know. Yeah. So knowing when to quit is the magic part.
Yeah. I think it's Albert Einstein who said that originally.
It's a myth that Albert Einstein said that.
Oh,
that's the thing. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I don't think he said that. Yeah. I'm always corrected when I say, Albert Einstein said. No, he didn't say that. Somebody else said it. I don't know.
That's interesting. Very cool. But I mean, but in principle, and that's the thing. I think, I think the road to success is littered with failure. That's usually what happens. And so, every time, I think the idea really is that every time you fail, you pick yourself back up. You what's the word? You deconstruct the whole thing, figure out where the problem was, and then try and fix that. Yeah. And then I guess you can try again with a new plan, and having fixed the things that have led to the failure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Failure. I mean, when you're in it, it doesn't feel like this, but failure is in a lot of ways a gift, right? Because the people that fail at something means they tried to do it and weren't successful for a variety of reasons. So they have the information about why what they attempted was not successful. So when they try again, they can not repeat those mistakes and maybe be successful the next time or the next time after that. Whereas if you haven't tried something and you've only sketched it out and watched videos and dreamed about it and never actually put pen to paper or actually tried to execute on the idea, you will never have the real world experience of what that thing is. Whether it's something simple like, changing the oil on your car. You're like, okay, I read the instructions on how to change the oil. You need this tool and you take that thing off and blah, blah, blah. But until you actually get under the car to do it, you won't have that experience and you won't know what it feels like to actually take that oil filter off or do any of that stuff. You have to walk the walk and fail at it before you can become an expert at it. And that's the scary part. And a lot of people, and the other piece of it is once you fail is the trying again. If at first you don't succeed, try again, right? It's the trying again. A lot of people fail and then give up. And, or I failed at that. I got to go do something else. There's the people that fail, regroup, and then try again that are the successful ones, and then trying again, right? Like here in Silicon Valley in California, the startups that are more likely to get funded are the ones that are run by founders that have failed in previous startups. right? So, and the VC or the venture capitalists that fund these things are looking, if you come with a brand new idea and you've never failed and you think it's a great idea, they look at the person next to you that has 3 failed startups behind them with a greater admiration than they do for you, the new guy who doesn't have any failures yet, because you still have to build your failures.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
And
counterintuitive, but that's the way it works.
yeah, and it's super important in the process. And I tell you what, let's talk about this week in photo for a minute, because
Yeah,
obviously I think a
absolutely.
lot of people know you as the host of the This Week in Photo
Yeah.
podcast. Now, you've been, I don't even know how long you've been running this podcast, but it's like, is it 9 years or something, or even longer than that?
I think we're in our 12th or 13th year, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been a while. I've been running it since I was 6. Yeah.
How has so running a podcast for such an extended period of time, um, how does it compare now to when you first started? In other words, what sort of developments and changes have you gone through with the podcast to arrive where you are now?
Yeah, great question. An uncountable number of changes have happened. The way that I approach this whole content creation and podcasting game is, it's a game of iteration, and it's a game of constant change and refinement and learning. And every episode that I do, I learn something, sometimes a lot, sometimes a little. Even in this one, being a guest on this show, I've learned things. Every time I do something like this, I pick up a little tip or something and apply it to the next one, so that I'm continually refining and streamlining, and that it's not a linear curve either, because there's innovations in camera technology. Like, the camera I'm using now is not the camera I was using when I started doing this stuff. The microphone, I'm not using this mic, the same mic that I used in the beginning, the mic arm, the desk, the lighting, the background, everything is in a constant state of, how can I make that better? Like, what can I put back there to make it more interesting? Or should I use, different kinds of lighting, a softbox next time? Maybe that's better. There's all these different kinds of iterations that pop up. And my brain is comes from a place of simplification. Maybe that's Apple in me, but it comes from a place of simplification and doing less, or using less stuff to do to produce great content. Like, I don't want a room full of studio equipment and black magic rack mounted systems on the wall and, cables hanging from the ceiling and all this. I want a very serene, sort of minimalist environment that just works every time I sit down in it. And that's what I solve for when I'm doing the podcast. But the TWiP of the days when TWiP started, what that looked like, and the Rube Goldberg sort of setup that I needed to use back then, which consisted of multiple computers. At one point, I had 3 computers running, 2 Mac Minis and an iMac, just to bring in guests and do screen sharing and portfolio sharing and all that stuff. From those days to right now is polar opposite, completely different. Like, what I'm doing today is the Frederick of, say 10 years ago when I was doing the podcast would have thought today what I'm doing now is science fiction, because the software that we're using, the cameras, everything is completely different and better. So when you sign up with yourself to become a podcaster, it is not okay, I need a mic, I need a camera, the computer lighting, I got to host it over here and do all those things. That's just the starting point. It's the starting point in a never-ending adventure of iteration. Because when you start your podcast, you're going to be doing one thing, and a month later, you're going to like, oh, this is great, but I saw Kirsten's podcast, and it's kind of a nice shallow depth of field behind him. I need to figure out how to get mine like that, right? So then you change your camera and lens. Oh yeah, I saw Frederick's. He had some colored lighting back there. Maybe I want to try it. Maybe I'll add some gels behind me. It goes on and on and on as you iterate, and that's part of the fun of it. That's not a negative. That is the fun of the podcasting world, because you're constantly learning new things and trying new things and experimenting, and new gear is always coming out, new software, and cloud-based software, or all the stuff. It's all fun if that's the thing that you're into, right? So you have to make sure that you're into that kind of iterative mentality, or improvement over time mentality, and not I need to buy a podcast in a box course and then I'm done after I finish that, because I know everything about podcasting after that. You won't, because next week podcasting will be different. So you have to be prepared to change, right?
Yeah, and it's also this thing like where my experience is that when I first started the Camera Shake podcast, it was very simplistic. It was literally like, okay, how can I film myself? How can I record my voice and talk to, at the time, Nick, at the same time, via something like Zoom, right? So that was basically it. I didn't really think about background or anything more than that. It's basically just like the basic technical things that I had to figure out, right? And then it's over time, it went from that to, it just got a little bit more elaborate, because in the beginning, I think it's always like a matter of like, oh, I can add this and that'd be cool, and then I add this thing, oh, and that'd be cool, and then before you knew it, it took 2 hours to set up before we could start recording. And I remember when the pandemic got to the point where you could actually be in the same room again, like, Nick and I were trying to make things better all the time. And so we went from a single camera setup to 3 camera setup. And I don't even remember how many lights. It was 5 lights, I think, and it was just getting crazy. The whole setup was getting crazy. And then 4, 5, 6 months, well, probably maybe 4 months later, we thought like, man, this is a real slog every week. So how can we make it better, but streamline the workflow? And so eventually we went back to 1 camera and actually 1 light and 2 background lights or something. So the whole setup was cut in half. And actually the end result it looked better because we thought more about the set and how we do it. And so it then it morphed into, eventually, of course, it morphed into the way it is now, where I'm recording in my house, and that's, at the moment, that is the set. That's what it is at the moment.
Yeah.
And in 6 months' time, it might be different, because I might either get bored of this and find a different setup, or, I've streamlined certain things. And of course, even just, meeting you and talking to you about Ecamm, and, the way that, I remember we had this conversation the first time we spoke online. And I remember we were talking about how much time it would take us in post-production, like, once we've recorded an episode, and how much time it would take to edit. And I remember I said, oh yeah, I mean, it takes me about 3 to 4 hours, all in to basically finish off an episode and edit. And I remember you saying 20 minutes, and that's it. And I'm like, what?
20 minutes in and out. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that makes you a better podcaster, right? Because as when you know that there's not this mountain of work after you finish creating the content that you then have to slog through to make it great. If you know that it's not going to take you that much time, it makes you more willing to book other podcasts and other guests. And then it just increases a lot of it. Well, it reduces the stress on you, because you're not doing that 3-hour slog anymore. Plus, it makes you more creative with the actual recording of the show, because it's pretty much done when I click stop recording. I just need to do a couple of bits to it and publish. So it makes it more fun for me, at least.
Exactly. Yeah, it makes it more fun. It gives you more time that you can then use to do other things. I mean, either you can look after your own well-being, of course, or you can use that time maybe to promote the podcast more, or or figure out other things, whatever it may be, But it's this thing of like you sort of I always think of it as, on one hand, I'm improving the podcast, and on the other hand, I'm streamlining the workflow so that I get more result for less input, as it were.
Exactly.
And it's just, the goal is always to get that to that optimum point, where with as little work as possible, you get an as good result as possible. And that's always,
using technology, right? Yeah, using technology And it's it sounds like using as little work as possible to get more. It sounds like, oh, you're just lazy, whatever. It's not. It's
No, no.
more of you're using the tools that are available. The end result is you want to have impactful conversations in podcasts. You want to have impactful conversations with your guests with as little friction as possible between you and the guest, and you and creating a finished episode and getting it to your audience. That's the goal, right? And
Absolutely.
putting a bunch of cameras and lights and this and switchers and all that stuff, trying to replicate television, I think is a non-starter, because this isn't television. This is a conversational, more intimate kind of art form. And if you lean into that, I think you'll be successful. The cool thing is the tools are evolving every day. Like when I first started podcasting, there was no concept of being able to even record on your iPhone, for example. People are doing full podcasts and YouTube channels now just with an iPhone only, maybe a mic, but just the iPhone. And they look great. They look better than anything I could have created, back in the day. And now we can do it with the phone. So all of this stuff is getting smaller and smaller, which I think is great because it's opening up and becoming more accessible to more people on the one hand, but then also for us, quote, seasoned podcasters, it's reducing clutter on our desks, right? It just gets easier and easier in order, to have these conversations, which I think is a great thing. So, I don't think there's a bad time to jump into podcasting right now. As a lot of people say, oh, it's too late, there's too many podcasts out there or whatever. There's not that many podcasts out there, to be honest with you. And a lot of them are dormant, where people started them and then abandoned them or whatever. So there's a lot of space in the podcasting space for people to jump in and try it. And whenever you jump in, you have the advantage of jumping in when technology has advanced to the point when you're jumping in, versus all of us that, like me 10 years ago, I had to put things together with rubber bands, bubble gum, and paper clips, to get the thing working. And now it's turnkey, in a lot of cases. In some cases, it's just a subscription to StreamYard or something. You just do your show through the browser. So yeah, it's
exactly.
amazing.
And it's interesting because the percentage of podcasts that are actually dormant is extremely high. It's like something like, I don't even know, 85%, 90%. It's a large number. Then of course you got to wonder why that is. And it's simply the effort you have to put in to making an episode like this. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, before the pandemic, was infinitely more effort involved then than it is now, and putting yourself through that week on week on week on week, does take its toll. And so it's not surprising that the vast majority of podcasts never make it past, what is it, episode 7 or something like that, because
it's something like that. Yeah,
it's that repeat effort. And of course, using tools now, I mean, the way we're recording now is, it's so different from the way that I record only a few weeks ago, which it's, to me, it's incredible. That's thanks to you. To you and Steve Brazel, I have to say, that I've managed to, to change the workflow, and it's, it's fantastic. So we're living in a great time for podcasting, actually, is what I always say, where we have these tools, AI tools we haven't even talked about, and it's a whole show on its own, really.
Oh yeah, we have to do another show and talk about that. Yeah, I'm experimenting now with a couple of AI tools that you can just give it the URL to a YouTube video, and it will crunch it and generate a bunch of shorts for you to post to YouTube or TikTok. Just exactly. It's just it's science fiction. Again, the past me, the me of 10 years ago would have never believed any of this would have been possible, in that AI, or that I'd still be doing this, right?
Exactly. AI audio processing, like how much time does that save, in the whole process of making an episode like this? Is incredible. But that's definitely a whole episode on its own. Frederick, it's been an absolute delight having you on the show. Of course, and I'm 100% certain that this wasn't the last time. I'm sure we'll have you on many times in the future. Always a great conversation. Frederick, thank you so much for being on the Camera Shake podcast today. Absolutely appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you. It's been an honor coming on. I enjoy being a guest on shows because my days are usually filled with me sitting on that side of the mic and asking the questions. It's refreshing to have a conversation with someone who, you click with, and we have so much in common, and, it becomes an an effortless conversation to just, chat about the stuff that we do every day and know, love, and, have fun with. So thank you for the opportunity. I enjoyed being on.
Okay, folks, that's all for today. It's been a long time ambition to have Frederick on the show, and I'm so glad we could make it happen. But before we go, let me just recommend another episode that I think you'll like. Check out episode 134 with Steve Brezel, where we're talking concept photography among many more things. I'm sure you'll love it. If you enjoy our content, consider supporting us on buymeacoffee.com to help us continue creating and bringing you more exciting episodes. Your support means the world to us. And for those of you who are listening to the audio version of this podcast, be reminded that there's a fully fledged video version over on YouTube in full Technicolor. And all you have to do is follow the link that I'm putting down here somewhere on the screen, unless I forget to do that. That does happen sometimes. Make sure you hit us up on YouTube. Make sure you press the like and subscribe button, because that helps us being found anywhere in the world. So thank you very much for watching and listening, and I'll see you again next Thursday.